We know that our lawmakers generally want to make laws that their constituents want. That's how they get reelected. But very few Americans actually pay attention to foreign policy unless American soldiers are dying overseas. So there's really very little upside to making foreign policy because Americans won't pay attention when things are going well, but they will pay attention when things are going badly. However, possibly there is a downside to not doing it as well. Because if we ignore foreign policy and then things start happening overseas that are bad, Americans may be like, why didn't you intervene? Or, why are people dying over there? Why are we now sending troops over there? Why couldn't we have done this before when maybe it would have taken diplomacy rather than the military? So ultimately, there may not be an upside to waiting either. And since the downside isn't very great, assuming Americans aren't dying from whatever the intervention is, then it is in Congress members' best interest typically to make foreign policy, even though it doesn't really help them in elections. It can potentially hurt them more if they don't make it. Then again, we know there is downside to making it. So basically, again, downside if it goes wrong. So basically, Congress members are sort of between a rock and a hard place, right? If they don't make foreign policy and things go wrong, they might get blamed. If they do make foreign policy and things go wrong, they might get blamed. So ultimately, most will end up making it. Now, in the era of CNN and other 24-hour news networks, we've seen that the downside has been inflated a bit because with this need to fill 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of airtime, which started with CNN and we've seen since with other news networks like Fox News and MSNBC, trying to fill this airtime means that ultimately they're going to start covering foreign policy more than, say, a half hour of nightly news would cover. So we might see more about foreign policy than we've seen before. And as we know from our lesson on the media, if it bleeds, it leads. So if foreign policy is going wrong, if people are dying overseas, we're more likely to know now than we used to be. And this can be both Americans dying overseas, footage of the caskets with the flags on them coming home to US air bases, but it may also be foreign deaths overseas, right? Covering potentially civil wars overseas, that then all of a sudden Americans are like, wait, so many people are dying. Shouldn't we be doing something? So again, that downside of if we make foreign policy that goes wrong, Americans might see it more. But if we don't make foreign policy and things go wrong, Americans might still see it more. So the CNN effect, as it was originally called by Etienne Galboa, a political scientist, tells us that this sort of urgency of foreign policy making has increased in the 24-hour a day, 7 day a week news cycle. But the sort of cost benefit of making it or not may have stayed roughly the same for American politicians.